Are you ready to begin?
I am ready to begin. I am very ready to begin.
Love this. So we actually had to move it by a week, Bootstrap hour. So we have some questions from people that couldn't make this second attempt. I'm going to ask you because it feels personal because we're coming into 2025, hurtling towards 2025, it feels like. So
That's
I'm going to chuck in the first question, and everybody, as usual, any questions, pop them in the comments. Otherwise, I will go through the DMs that we've had, and there's been some very different ones going on. So the first question is actually from someone called James, and James has asked, is it really the right time to build a business if I'm not looking for investment? I'm wondering climate wise.
well, I yeah, that's a good question. I find that question a little odd, but let me explain why. So I think that we're all driven by different reasons to build businesses, and if we're all waiting for the right economic time, um, it's 8:04. Can I mention Labour? But hold that thought. But if we're all waiting for the right economic time and circumstances, I fear that none of us will ever get anything done. And so I think investment has been very, very tricky during the last 12 to 24 months. And if we look at like valuations of businesses back in 2022 compared to now, I'd say in certain areas you're on a minimum 50% drop in the valuation, possibly as high as 75%. And so I think all of that considered, if you're building a business that allows you to generate revenue from the off, then I think there's never a bad time. Um, it's a tricky market out there. Had this conversation last night. So, in way of having been around the block a couple of times before, I would say it's a particularly hard market. And things that I've seen recently that I'd never seen before were: can I defer payment? Can I move payment into January when we're in November? We've got cash flow problems, and these are big businesses, so it's not the best market. But I think if you want to build something, before going out to market and giving it the big one, just do the market research that someone wants to buy your product and service. And that has to be, the precursor to launching anything, because without that, you're going to burn cash, and you are not going to get the result that you wanted. I think that I think this market is much harder if you don't have sales ability and you don't have the ability to generate leads. People, when it's a really good market, frankly, they buy any old shite because they've got money sloshing around. And when we're in this market, people are rightly very cautious, being very careful. If they can't hire new people in their business and they can't make those cover those costs, and the reality is they're not going to be spending big on whatever product or service people think they're rustling up. So that would be my very long answer to the first question.
Is this a sign of things to come for question and answers? But hey, man,
No,
detailed.
I'm hoping it's going to kick in a little more succinct as time goes on.
Which actually brings me to the next question that we had last month that we didn't get to answer, which is, if you are being offered to take on a business, what questions should you be asking the owner and asking yourself before deciding whether to, bootstrap?
If you're being offered to take on a business, so taking on a business is an acquisition, really. It's not a, it's not. I guess is it bootstrapping in the same way? It would be a growing concern at that point. So I think it's about that's about doing an acquisition, and therefore you should be doing a level of due diligence to understand, is the business financially as solid as the owner is telling you it is. Um, I would be talking to some of their clients and having some conversations about the level of service. Um, and I would be having a real look at the cash flow in the business, because the books will tell you, the FARD accounts will tell you something, but they won't tell you how hard it is getting money through the business. The other key bit is contracts and commercials, because if someone's just delivering services and has no contracts with people, and there is no business, there's no value, and if there's no processes, so it's a vicious circle. So you must do a level of due diligence around people, processes, technology, and find out, if is the most of these businesses under 10 mil, 5 to 10 mil, are run and business development is managed by the founder. If that founder is stepping out, how the hell are you going to continue to drive that business, new, revenue, delivery, etc.? So there's a lot of questions, but I would view whoever's asked that question, in my mind, that's an acquisition they're making, and they should treat it as such.
Interesting. Okay. And so, yeah, I mean, to even think about the bootstrapping part is not even, you're not even there yet. You got to figure out what the business is and how it's doing before you can even get to that point.
Yeah, I think so. And if it's a proper business, it's going to be generating revenue. And so therefore it's not really a bootstrap question in the same way.
Mm,
It's more about, is it a legit business? Could someone else jump in? But this goes back to processes, and this is probably the biggest failing in most companies. If you haven't got documented how your business operates, no one else can pick it up, and therefore the value of that business is massively diminished.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially when you've spoken before about succession plans and this, that, and the other. You can't really succeed someone else when there's nothing there to run with, and you have to do it all over again. All right. So this next question is back onto more specifically bootstrapping. Should I think about a board if I'm bootstrapping?
um, I think, well, I don't think a board is linked to whether you're bootstrapping. I think a board is necessary at the scale of the business. So there's lots of businesses get to a certain revenue and growth, and then they need proper governance and decision making. But I don't think that the board bit is relevant whether it's bootstrapped or it's invested. It's more around the size and scale of the organisation. I do think lots of people avoid putting a board in place at all, because the founder likes to make all the decisions. Absolutely get that. And to a certain point makes sense. But if you're thinking about maximizing the value of the business at some point, then you're going to need a management team meeting. You're going to need a board for some decision making and some challenge on the founder. But again, I think that's more a size and scale of the business rather than bootstrapped or invested.
Okay. So I'm going to pop the next question in for you. And this is, what's the difference between leading and managing? Oh, I'm going to put it back up. However, I doubled the words. What's the difference between leading and managing? I'm bootstrapping.
I think the difference with leading and managing is pretty fundamental, to be honest. I think if you're leading something, you're setting a vision, and you're allowing people to execute on that in the way, the best way possible for them. I think if you're managing, my implication of that is a much lower level focus around what you're doing and how you're doing it. And again, I think we've got, as a business that I'm a shareholder in, was aghast to hear 160 people have been put through leadership training recently when it's a business of 500. And so you begs the question why a third of the workforce need leadership development. I think that it's become a bit of a trendy buzzword. And the reality is it's about who is driving that vision and the strategy, and less about the processes and the how to. For me, managing is the processes, and it's making sure that things can run, not without people, but you could, you could. I guess the best analogy, the best way that I will answer that question is around making sure that you can actually run these things with clear instructions, and anybody effectively could pick that up and run it, rather than an individual who's an expert in that specific area. But I do think that I think they're conflated massively. I'm a good leader. I wouldn't say I'm a great manager, but I think that's because I've had much more senior people report in over the years, and therefore I've got a high expectation that people actually know what they're doing. Um, but I think this hugely conflated and very trendy to be on leadership development training these days. And yeah, that's my 2 cents on that one.
I was going to say the very trend is very on trend, isn't it? You can't really move on LinkedIn without at least one leadership post every other post, really.
Every 5 minutes.
Every 5 minutes, there's a hustle, 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 side hustle, leadership, leadership, leadership. What's the other buzzword that we could probably pop in there? Investment, investment, investment.
There's a lot of there's definitely a lot of investment. Yeah,
Do you think, this is me actually asking this, but do you think that at the moment, because of the fact that social media really is hyping up investment, that it's actually causing people not to go down the bootstrapping route? They're not really thinking about it because of the Hollywood style view of what investment's like.
I think that that's been the case for a while. I think people celebrate getting investment in a way that I've never understood it, because it feels counterproductive to me. I think people should be celebrating getting the first customer, retaining the first customer, growing the business, getting the processes so they're repeatable. But that's not sexy. It's just grind. And I think it's about the big ticket items, and being able to say I've raised a mil or I've raised 5 million. I think the bit that people don't see often is where they end up in 5 years time, owning a minority percentage in the business that they've sort of poured blood, sweat and tears into. There's some businesses that will always need investment, and in my mind they're the ones in the product space. There's not many product businesses that have been bootstrapped, that are heralded as big success stories. But I think again we're looking at the big unicorns there, rather than the real world, where most of us would be overjoyed with a 7-8 figure exit. We're not wanting to be billionaires. I mean, but I think that goes back to the what we all doing this for in the first place, and we're all driven with very different motivations.
And that's definitely something when it comes to posts and context, isn't it? You can have Alex Hormozy telling you that you should drop everyone and run into the sunset with your business and make that your wife. And then other people going, not the lifestyle I actually want. Um,
And I think that's it though. That's the key bit. Do people know themselves well enough to understand the decision they're making? Lots of us come to emotional intelligence slightly later in life, and some frankly never come to it. And so therefore, I think it's a do you understand yourself well enough, and without this turning this into a rom-com, but in my view, as a die-hard romantic, you can be as slavishly focused on the business as you like, but somebody comes along and your world is going to stop. And so, therefore, being open to that, I personally, I wouldn't want to be a machine who is just building businesses, and you've got no you've got no environment, you've got no frame of reference. What are you doing it for in the first place? Would be my question. But I do know, and I think some of that is also, it's not even the bro hype, but they've almost become caricatures of themselves. In the, oh, this is who he is, how he executes on it, and he's wildly successful. I'm not knocking it. But I do think that people then become or fall into the trap of either believing their own hype or trying to create some sort of cult like status around how they operate their business. But yeah, that's my view on that one.
We've got a comment from Andrew Cameron. It's quite lengthy, so I'm going to pop it on the screen. And he says, I'm often involved in setting up brands for startups. They are obviously keen to keep costs as low as possible. But my belief is that in getting your brand right from day one is one of the biggest investments you can make in your business. And getting things right from day one can give you or help communicate a clear competitive advantage. Thoughts?
Great question, Andrew, and I agree. I think that, like everything, there needs to be a proportional response to how much time and effort and money somebody is going to spend when they're in startup phase around a brand, because it's very ethereal and it's very theoretical. And let's face it, the stats on businesses surviving from startup to scale up are pretty dreadful in the UK at the minute. However, I do think that being clear around what your brand stands for and how it is going to manifest in the wider world is particularly important. So I would always say that there is a need to do some thinking and work around brand. We find with the clients we're working with, they're scale up rather than start up, but there's not a client that we've worked with in the last 2 years where we haven't done work on on strategy and brand almost as a joint exercise, and that's because they don't have the time or the money or the inclination to go deep on building a brand. So I think it's that kind of proportion bit. When we assess the maturity of businesses, we will often find that the strategy in a business, may well be a 3, 4, 5. And you could argue out of 10 that's on the low side. But the reality is, are they actually funded, and do they have a budget that justifies a deeper look at the strategy than that? I would encourage that they're sitting on a 5, 6, 7, and they've got that strategy tied back to objectives and goals, and that therefore allows people to feel they're contributing towards the key strategy outcomes of the organization. But I think brand is the same. Super important. I think the default position for plenty of founders is it feels a little bit like like a training budget when you're doing an implementation. So they want to do it on a fiver, and we really need to educate why it needs to be slightly more. And I know it's not a fiver. I'm being flippant there, but I think some of this is actually facilitating founders and management teams through the importance of it, rather than kind of whipping them and saying, you're shite, you haven't got a brand. That's just counterproductive.
Okay, so Andrew, I'm hoping that you are still here and would have weighed in with that commentary there. But I think it's so true. It's so true, which actually leads to the next question, which is again about when you start your business and you bootstrap. And we know this from the grafter, is building community now important from the start? Because it seems like community is also another buzzword that is everywhere.
It's interesting, isn't it? I think you've got internal community, and then I think you've got the community of whatever you're delivering in way of services, product. We probably pay more attention to community in the grafter than plenty of businesses that we work with, if I'm totally honest. So I'd like to think that's because we're at the head of the curve. Um, and it may be, but I think it's also that we've probably jumped in without actually thinking about the power of the community fully and how do we properly get the community to engage. Um, People looking at my business will say community looks strong. I think there's a way to go to get that community properly engaged. But I think if a founder is intentional about how they're going to work with their clients, with their team, and community may play a part of that. But communities have been around forever and a day. They just weren't called community. So they were called, user groups, user forums. And as far back as the first time I put a social care system in the UK, which is more years than I care to remember, um, we had user groups of local authorities and we pulled people together who were using this piece of software across London boroughs to talk about what was working, what wasn't, and where do we want the improvements. And that's 25 years ago. But it wasn't called user-centered design then either. It doesn't mean it didn't happen. It just means that we've created terms for these things, and things like social media have helped us talk about it easier. But I do think that for me personally, having a community is important. I like having a community of other entrepreneurs because it becomes an environment where I can ask questions, and I can, sort of lean into that for help and support. But I think that it has, I think it's become very trendy. Um, and the reality is, if you were prioritizing steps of building a business, community is nice to do. It is not essential as you are trying to generate business and deliver services. It comes further down the road.
I think that's a very useful thing to know, is that you don't need to do everything in the beginning, because I think, with again going back to all of the social media, the content that keeps coming out every day, is that building a community and do this and do this and do this. And I think back to Andrew's comment about brand, and you must have this all ready to go. Andrew actually says, very useful, especially the thoughts about strategy. A lot of people just want a nice logo, which is just the icing on the cake. The brand strategy is the important bit.
Yeah, I totally concur with that, Andrew. But the amount of times that somebody has tried to articulate their strategy, well, firstly told me it's a level 10 in way of well thought through and everyone knows what it is, and then tried to articulate it and can't rustle up the elevator pitch, but can point me to a website that was done by their brother, and a logo that was developed by somebody else. So I agree in way of that. And I think brand bit is about educating. It's, people just want to see every single penny that you spend when you're a bootstrap founder at the start, you want a return on. And here's the news, you damn well should. And that's the reality. And I think it's a shame that businesses that have got investment in them are probably the ones that have a stronger brand because they've had that ability to spend proper time and money on developing it. But you don't. It's a luxury item, albeit one that really has a lot of importance.
Indeed, indeed. Okay, so I'm just seeing if there's any other questions from people. Otherwise, we might make this a quick one, and then you can go for a great walk. Although I do have one question, which is regarding like your year into bootstrapping. What should you be, what should be the thing that you should be doing a year in?
I think it depends where the business has got to. Is the reality. So bootstrapping. I don't think there's a linear path with it. I think again it's back to revenue, turnover, clients, team, and it's where is your business a year in, and what do you need to do. I think the really important bit is that people should evaluate their strategy, their team, how they're delivering services, what their cost base is. I personally think they should do it all the time. But that is very tricky when you are running the business. So worst case scenario, do it once a year and have a proper look at, were the constructs that you've put in place around team meetings, how people work, how people engage, how you get clients together, is that adding the right value? Or was that a gut feel, 15 months ago that served you well at the start, but it has to change? So I think don't be afraid to reevaluate. The strategy and the vision doesn't change, but the goals and the how you actually execute, that should always change. And so I think it's you don't get to a certain point of bootstrapping when you go, okay, we're up to level 2. It's not, unfortunately, like a computer game. Well, actually, I'm not sure I'd like it if it was. But I think you kind of get to the point where you just, whatever metrics you set. If I talk about the grafter, we've doubled our turnover this year and we've maintained our margin. But Jesus, it's been hard work. And so the bit for me now, as I go into the next year, is thinking about how we deliver. Who do we need in the team to help that delivery? It's distinctly different at the end of the year to what it was at the start. And as a founder, you shouldn't be afraid to make those moves, make those changes, and make sure that you've got the right team and the right capability around you. And this is the bit, I think, where people think running a business is ruthless. You have a legal obligation as the founder of a business to do right by that business. So I think it's more in that vein, constantly reevaluating, making sure that you've got the right talent, the right challenge, and you are hitting those goals. And there's lots of ways to do that. But I do think that reevaluate and taking a step back, however you scoped out the strategy and the goals for the year before, get back around the table, be objective, challenge yourself, and ask yourself some hard questions. Am I still the right person to be leading this? Is this actually what I want to fucking do? Because so many people think they're tied into these things, and you're not. You set it up. You can choose to walk away and do something different if it's not what you want to do. Nobody is tied to these things. But I'll caveat that by saying it's a roller coaster and it's hard work building businesses. So if you want to step out the door every time, something doesn't go your way, you're going to be in and out of that door like it's going out of fashion. Get a revolving one. So I think that just need to be realistic. But at a fundamental level, if you're not happy with what you're doing, don't fucking do it.
I think we've had no more questions come through. I actually think that's a great place to leave it for 2025, is to challenge people in what are you doing? And if you don't like it, why are you still there?
I wholeheartedly agree. I might have to rip that off for a cheeky little blog as well. It feels like that's that's a strong sentiment, but it's serious. People always, we set resolutions. We give stuff up. January, everyone goes sober. Goes off meat or whatever else people do. And I mean, I've done that, but I won't be doing that again. And I think, a slightly more fundamental level, ask yourself some key questions. Am I actually doing what I want to do? Am I enjoying it? Is it lighting me up? Because if it isn't, go and find something that is. You've only got one life.
Well, do you know what? Let's leave it there. Let's absolutely leave it there. Challenge people to ask those questions of themselves, and let's see what they come back with for 2025, because it's just around the corner.
Literally round the corner.
Indeed. Okay. Thank you very much, Rach. Have a great day. Have a great Christmas and New Year.
Brill, thank you, mate. And we're resuming second week, I think, second or third week of January, but we'll get some dates in the diary and let everybody know when we're when we are regrouping.
Here comes the bootstrapper.